were surprised by?
You mean from the research team, Deb? Yeah. She's wanting us to work. Researchers? Joe? Yeah.
I think that's a really good question, Deb. And I guess all of us have been working in related areas for quite a long time, but there are still constantly things that do surprise me. So I'm surprised about just how far a lot of the kids have got with some of the projects in a short amount of time. Like I think you are in the conversation we had yesterday at your school. It is surprising the range of students who are caught up and do a really fantastic job of this work, and also the ways in which the teachers have worked with students to really take them very far in their learning. I come from a background in drama ed, and I'm a bit of an evangelist. I go knocking on Sunday mornings trying to convert people to my drama ed religion. But I feel like a lot of this work in games is even more powerful than a lot of the work I've seen in drama, and it seems to be more accessible for people to draw on the affordances of the games in the classroom than perhaps it often is, to become a really good drama teacher. Like people can draw on what they've done and interpret it in different ways like we've seen today. So that continues to surprise me. And I think the other thing that surprises me though is how many parents I've encountered feel negative about doing this work until they see the results. So it's kind of the believers and the non-believers.
It was one of the things that surprised me, which sort of back to the other question, was when we were approaching the teachers to ask about the issues of assessment, I thought it was going to be a major problem. I thought people would find it really, really difficult. And in research they talk about triangulating your findings and asking same question multiple ways to multiple audiences to make sure you're not just hearing what you want to hear or you're making stuff up or whatever. So our version of triangulation was like, we would say, so is assessment a problem? Expecting them to say yes. And then we had all these follow-up questions. They're like, no, not really. So are you sure? Are you really sure? So telling the stories about why it wasn't a problem, I think, is really, really important. You're right.
Just to ask on from what Joe's talking about with parents and encountering a bit of negativity, I think the data side of things that Sandy showed us before is really great. I'd love to obviously get some examples of that too to have available to show to parents if they, initially come up with some problems with gaming. Is that going to be something that we can access to share with parents from school?
The kind of data that we've collected from both the 2012 survey and the 2014 you know what I mean, that one, are really interesting. That's the first time we've seen that 2014 data. So, there's a lot of thinking and work around that to come, and we can certainly make the data from both of those years available to teachers in the team. We have started to write about it and analyse it and think about it, and there is a paper which, again, we can send you. It's an academic paper, but it's got charts and things, and it's not got that many words, but it's got lots of charts, so Sandy understands it. No, seriously, level of reflection and analysis that the kids are going through when they're talking about what they like about games or what they think games are good at or what gets in the way. And some of that's been surprising. It's surprising to do with their resilience, surprising to do with their preparedness to bear with things, their confidence in working with each other, and also internally in terms of the kinds of things that I thought they'd like a lot, they don't necessarily, and the ways in which these preferences that the children outline are different from when similar studies are done amongst adult gamers using those kind of criteria. The patterns come out differently. So what we're getting, and what I'm delighted with, is we're getting muddy, messy, complicated pictures of what kids and teachers are doing, but also a very optimistic kind of view.
And part of the ongoing work of the project team is to produce a range of outcomes and reports and papers that can be used for precisely that sort of work.
Thank you. One of the things I was surprised with was that students in the upper end of primary really didn't want to use games. They just didn't see it as part of their curriculum work. and they were quite against the use of it. And the teacher really had to work quite hard with the children to justify their use and give examples why it should be used, how it would help their learning. The games should be only used at home, and why would we bother using games in the classroom? So I thought that was interesting. Another interesting thing that I found working with teachers was for example, one of the teachers used a game to help stimulate young children's writing. So by playing the game, they'd then go and write, and the boys loved it because they could visually see the play. They then had something to write about. They could describe the character. They could talk about the event in sequence. So if they were doing narrative text, they could do the little story. So it gave them the platform to write, and they wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. But then that teacher moving into year 7 doing the same thing, she found that the writing just wasn't as fluent. So for the little boys in grade 2 they had a huge gain in the writing ability. But when you hit grade 7, that gain wasn't as evident because the literacy capability was set by that stage. So the boys in year 2, you could see, would write more and develop and have greater stimulus, but by the time they're year 7, that's their level of ability for writing. So it didn't actually help improve their writing at that stage. So it's sort of set by the time they hit that level, so it's not going to, have the bigger impact as it would in the younger years. And that was a teacher that was her reflection, her outcome. It was really quite interesting, I thought. So, it's the way the teacher actually uses the game in the classroom where the power lies, and the approaches that they take and the discussion around it and the support they provide and the opportunities, I think, is one of the biggest outcomes for me of looking into games.
Yes, a follow-up. I was just interested in your comment that students' literacy ability was set by year 7. Do you mean that English literacy teaching from there on to year 12 is doomed to failure?
No, the teacher just found that the level of stimulation the game was providing wasn't anywhere near as much as what was happening with the younger ones. That the visuals and the opportunities that the kids were taking on in the lower years and their writing ability seemed to be improved and stimulated more in the lower years than it was in the upper. So the child's development wasn't as great when they were writing, where you could really see a growth. And I suppose in the younger years, their literacy abilities are forming and their opportunities are there. So she just found it just didn't take off anywhere near as well with that type of activity with it than it did with the younger years. And I suppose she just said it was more orientated to the boys and their visual stimulus. They could picture it. Because they could picture it, they could write so much more, and they're more stimulated in that way.
Just with my experience with Year 9 English with Assassin's Creed, I mean, before I chose that trailer on YouTube, I asked the kids what they were interested in. So maybe it had to do with the type of game perhaps the teacher used, because as they get older, they're playing different games and they're interested in different things. Obviously, we couldn't play Assassin's Creed in class because it's M or R rated or something ridiculous, but the trailer itself didn't have any gore or violence. So writing to stimulus, which was our end of unit task, I found it very effective, particularly with the boys, but also the girls, because they'd all played it. They loved it, and just brainstorming vocab words, and because it's set in a different time period, we learn a little bit about history, and I found it very effective.
Great point. Thanks, Bree. Because one of the things that's come up throughout the project is, of course, that there is no single version of child gamer, and there's lots of variations that needs to be factored in all the time.
Just with some of the data, we saw the variation between Queensland and Victoria, and I was wondering if it's possible to see the difference between boys and girls and how they liked and didn't like the games and which particular games.
Because that's still in analysis. But yes, that's definitely, it's something I'm particularly interested in myself. So that is something that's going to be unpacked as we go forward. But I think we can make a few observations about it.
A couple of things too with the data between Queensland and Victoria. A lot of the data we've collected is really about the games the kids have played and that kind of thing. So, some of it is about, which year levels answered the survey and that kind of thing. So while the first breakdown is between the states, a lot of those differences won't actually be significant because maybe it's like Frank's Year 9 class that are playing one particular game, and then we've got Deb's, grade 3 or 4, are they grade 3 class here in Queensland. And so, it's not really as different between the states probably as that first draft might suggest.
I should just say a couple of other things about that. One is that, as Jo has said, these are very particular groups of kids, and if you were doing a full-on statistical survey, you'd need bigger groups of kids than we have. What we've got are these are the patterns between the 400 odd kids we have over the course of the project, what they're doing. Very, very interesting and useful, I think, as an indicator. But if you had millions of kids, I don't know whether you get quite the same outcome. The other thing to say is that the nature of this project is a really interesting one, whereby schools pretty much all opted in. And the schools in Victoria, I don't want to overstate the differences because over the 3 years they've moved, but the schools in Victoria, generally speaking, had more experience working with games than some of the schools in Queensland. Some of the schools in Queensland have done lots, but for some others, this was kind of like moving into a new world. So there are also differences to do with, they're not grand differences about the nature of, Queensland is like X and Victoria is like Y, but it is reflective of these were schools where there had been pre-existing work in games, and these are schools where it was starting.
Is there an outcome of this project where there will be some examples of planning for curriculum and learning, and particularly assessment? So I know literacy and numeracy in terms of monitoring is a fairly simple one to plan for, but if you're going to invest in gaming time in your classroom, then you're obviously going to have to create a space in the curriculum that meets all those other areas. So you're covering off the content, and there's a certain standard of assessment at the end that you have to, measure the children on. Is there going to be any work around that in terms of providing examples? You were doing some work around assessment, but some solid examples of how teachers have worked in this way?
Some of that is being covered in the short reports of the activities that were conducted at the various schools, which are available on the WordPress site at the moment. But that is an area that we'll need to tell more detailed stories about.
How well someone does in English, maths, science, history or whatever, and measuring that on a scale, how does this all fit within that particular assessment style,
I think one of the really interesting tensions that came up in the project was about, what counts as knowledge, aligned to the curriculum, and what is more general but very valuable learning, And so I'm going to throw to Deb here to talk about this a little bit, because I think, she has an interesting story around this in relation to Minecraft, because we had several rich conversations about, how do you take that work that she did with Minecraft in Year 3, for instance, and put it on a report card, and whether or not that matters. Deb, do you mind?
Yes, we did have lots of conversations around this because, again, my frustration was I saw so much learning come out of this whole Minecraft project, but none of it was anywhere where I could tick it off on a report card. And my little girl that I keep referring back to, the dyslexic girl, she did so much work and she helped so many students, and there was so much problem solving and collaboration and cooperation and all that sort of is like a microcosm of society. It was played out in Minecraft, and yet none of that I wasn't able to, apart from verbally being able to talk to parents about it, there was nowhere where I could really say what these students had learnt. And I think that's where the curriculum falls down in general, that who says that something is more important than something else? And you can problem solve in many, many ways. You know, we always ask children to write something down to prove that they've done it or accomplished it, or so I can then give them an A, B, C or D. And I think that's really, really sad. And I discussed this with Michael and I said, you know, even though this little girl did so much and she was the shining star in the whole Minecraft project, she still failed English because she can't write. And that's what we judge her on. And that's wrong, you know, and I think we need to advocate. We need to get out there and say, who says this is what we should be judging students on? I could, if you gave me 5 minutes, I could sit and tell you so much that I saw, that she learnt, that others learnt. But again, it came down to an A, B, C or D on a report card. Can you read? Can you write? You know, that can you comprehend? And it's unfair for those students.
I think it's not to say that, you know, there aren't many opportunities to map the work that happens around games back to the curriculum. I don't think we're saying that, but I think we're saying that there's a lot also that it's, you know, where it's not quite that straightforward. So we don't want to give the impression that we're anti, you know, mapping back onto the curriculum or something like that.
I was reading a report on the value of play, and they were talking about in there about how there was a company that was looking to employ the best and brightest of the people in America, it was, and they found that they were getting the best graduates from the universities, but they weren't doing what they'd hoped they would do. They didn't have these great problem-solving abilities and so on. And what they actually discovered was they wanted to talk about the way the children played when they were the way they played when they were children, and whether they'd made things and done things. And those people who'd had those experiences as a child actually would turn into their best creative employees. And so I feel that just following on from what Deb was saying there, that perhaps that is a fall down in our curriculum, that we're just sort of valuing these. We're not valuing these things that they're getting from games and play in general.
I'm working with grade 5, 6s doing a massive unit using Minecraft this term, where kids have researched apocalyptic events that have caused Earth to basically be unsustainable, and they've had to move to a new planet and use Minecraft to build a new world. Different teams are in charge of different districts. So there's an environmental group, an industry group, and they're collaborating together to ensure that doesn't happen to their new planet. So for us, we have, in terms of assessment for that project, we're looking at a lot of content areas such as, geography, sustainability and resources, even economy. So we've got those content descriptors as part of AusVals that we're ticking off. But we're also using a different assessment schedule, which is on 21st century skills. So the skills that kids are going to need that are transferable. So when they enter a workforce that, we can't comprehend, they've got things like creativity, problem solving, collaboration, working with others and things like that. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question in terms of some of the assessment that we look at, but it's sort of a two-pronged approach for us with content and then skills. But I agree with Deb as well that there's so much stuff when you're watching kids in a classroom lean over the back of their chairs talking to each other about what they're building, and so many little things that we can't, tick off on a report card that, is part of the magic of watching something like that happen. So
Can I just add to that through all the teaching, you're looking at your curriculum and you know what you're going to teach, you write in your program. I then go out and look for different games that might enhance that. So, for example, the geography with Run That Town, that was just perfect. It fit in so well with building the community. The girls played the game, they downloaded on their own phones and went to different levels and so on. And that really did enhance what we were doing within our program of work. Another one was doing geography too, the geospace, the guesser. GeoGuessr, and that was fantastic for looking at the different landscapes, environments, and had to place them in different places around the world. So I tend to look at the games and how they can really support and complement what we're doing within our program. And in the library, for example, through doing one of the episodes, is about wolves. And at the end of the lesson, you can imagine my excitement when a child came up and asked if she could borrow The Call of the Wild by Jack London. I was just over the moon. So, you know, there are other things that come out of the games, but they really do support what we're teaching.
You know, it's very obvious that there are so many benefits from the activities that the students do in all curriculum areas, not just through gaming, and that we have no chance of assessing, you know, what benefits or positive outcomes are coming through that. I think as teachers we all know that, you know, we have an incredible impact on the students in front of us, but we never realise how significant that impact is. And I think additionally that's going to come through the game projects as well. I know with the project that we worked on at St Lawrence's, we already had an assessment item, and I just used a game focus to deliver the content differently and still use the same assessment item that all the other classes were using as well. So I think the important thing is that we look at just using something a bit more creatively, and you know, the benefits are going to be far beyond what we might initially have perceived anyhow.
Just on the initial thing a little while ago now, but in terms of looking for the researchers to spread the word, but as teachers you can also spread the word about what's occurred in the projects through conferences and professional journal papers and so forth, and give your own voice to what you've experienced during the project. I thought that would be also a good addition to what the researchers were contributing.
I've got one which is about it's not exactly related to, you know, the use of games in the classroom, but it is related to what we've done in this project, and that is that, you know, teachers have been incredibly generous with the amount of time that they've given to the project. But as Deb mentioned a couple of times, you know, at a certain point she got to the stage where she was saying that bloody, you know, serious play project. I guess I've got a question about how teachers feel about giving time to a project like this, to a research project. At what point does it become, you know, at what point as researchers are we asking too much of you? You know, were we in your schools for too long in this project, for instance? Would it have been better if we'd come for a year or for 18 months, say, and then gone and worked with some different schools, or what? And Deb, you've been quite vocal about this, so I'm going to ask you first.
Although I think you're asking the wrong people because they're here, they're committed. So it's a loaded question, that one.
No, I do think absolutely we should give back in this way. We should take part in research like this, and this is the way we can perhaps bring about change, because yes, we do know that as teachers we make a difference, we make a huge difference, we make the biggest difference, but doesn't mean we should sit back. Just because we know that doesn't mean we should sit back and say, well, this is how we've always done things, this is the report cards we've always used, so we'll just go with it. It's through things like this that I think we can bring about change, so we need to be vocal and we need to participate in things like this. However, the difficulty with something that goes over this many years, for me personally, I changed year levels so over those 3 years. So I could never really refine something and follow it through as much as I would have liked to have done. So every year it was like, oh, I've got to think of something new all over again. So that was frustrating. So from that point of view, I think, you know, do me for a year and move on, that probably would have been quite good. But on the other hand, if I think it is valuable, but I would like to see what really comes of this, because as I said, I won't go so far as to say I could have told you would have found all this out. But we did say you're going to find out that you can use games and children can be engaged, and it all comes down to how the teacher puts it out there. If I say we're going to have fun, guarantee we're going to have fun. If I say this is going to be boring and you're going to hate it, that's what will happen. I do think that we should yes, take part in it, but perhaps shorten it back a little.
Do we have any other teachers who would like to make a comment about that, about the time commitment to the project?
I certainly agree, Deb, that the issue of going over 3 years would be fantastic if you could work with the same students for 3 years. Now, I was fortunate enough in the first and second year to actually take the same group of students through from one year to the next. And that was really valuable. And then this year, there's a whole new group of students. So I really felt like we were just sort of back to scratch again with the student analysis. I mean, certainly the learning from my point of view was okay. You know, I can learn from the previous years. But I think if a project's going to go over that period of time, it's difficult if you are changing the clientele that you're working with.
Can I ask the other side of that coin, which is for people who are in schools, did you feel that we were in there enough?
In the beginning, no, definitely not, because, again, we did talk about this. Even 6 months into it, we were still looking at each other saying, what are we meant to be doing? And I think we didn't have a full understanding of what it was that you wanted from us, and we kind of were looking for a little bit of guidance. And I understand now that you guys have all, just as my focus has changed as the research has gone on, I understand too that possibly yours has, that you weren't sure what you would find. It was like me in Minecraft. I wasn't sure what could do with it, so it was a big open-ended thing. But yeah, in the beginning I felt we wanted you there more only because we didn't know what the heck we were doing.
And I support what Debbie says. But the interesting thing with the library was I was quite keen to get this Xbox Connect. So it gave us an opportunity, and Louise was very kind and purchased it for us. But we've been able to use that. Actually, I've used the same students for 4, 5 and 6, and now grade 6, because they come to library lessons. So I've been able to use it. And from that, it's been a bounce, really. You know, a board that they can bounce off and do other things. So the year 6s, even when we did the filming yesterday, they've all played that game. But the enthusiasm was amazing. Did you think so, Joe? Oh, yeah. They were just pouncing everywhere, and they were really engaged in it, and they were learning about the animals' habitat. So, yeah, I think it's been good for us, although I think I did need more time to really develop it.
In Victoria, all of the schools, as Catherine said, that were recruited had already done some games. So we've looked more at, you know, what are the schools still doing. But one of the real strengths, I think, of this project has been teachers and the conversations and relationships they've developed with each other from other schools. And I just wondered if, Beck, you could just talk about, because some of the schools in Victoria ended up visiting each other, so people came and saw what other schools were doing, and they sort of spent time in each other's classrooms, and I think that was quite interesting. Did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
It was really lovely when we first started. My favourite part of going to the Serious Play conferences were meeting up with other teachers doing similar stuff. And you didn't feel quite so alone hearing that there are other teachers sort of trying things and experimenting, thinking, where's this going? I got to go and visit Auburn South because we'd brought in iPads probably in my first year of teaching prep, and I'd been in prep for 5 years, so we'd had a bit of time really refining apps and games and that sort of stuff. So it was really nice to go to somewhere like Auburn South who just got iPads in and then talk to their staff about, you know, ways of integrating apps into your literacy rotations and being critical of apps. And sort of reversely, Auburn South were doing really great projects as well with game making, so they were able to talk to our grade 3 teachers who were doing the same thing. So it was really nice to sort of, everyone had something to share and offer around. And Lynette, who was at Backsmash, she's doing amazing stuff with a totally different group of kids compared to my school. But it was really lovely to see just another way of how you could run, you know, a games-based unit in your classroom.
I was just wondering, to what extent do people feel that they're professionally alone as game-using teachers?
Feeling alone is a constant battle for me because I'm across 3 staff rooms. So at our school, we're curriculum staff rooms. So I'm in the home ec staff room. And because I've used games in SOS and English, which is a good 6 to 10 minute walk away. I found it hard to have that conversational exchange. Pete McVie, who did the Statecraft X, he was SOS as well, but on a different year level. And then when I joined in, he also had year 10, so it was very hard to meet up with him and have that conversation. Lou's in my staff room as well, but she's language-based, so, sometimes we'd have a conversation about it, but I often felt alone. If it wasn't for Roberta having that constant, she'd be flicking me emails constantly, I probably, like I said before, I would have given up. Time management is a really hard thing for me because of all the planning, and I know all teachers have a lot of planning, but because I've got so many subjects that are very, very different from each other, I found it very difficult. But I had a very strong support system within this project, so I found that quite wonderful.
We're at Nudgee Junior, which is at Indooroopilly, just on the west side of Brisbane. The project changed quite considerably for us within our context. Originally, the Year 5s picked it up for the first 2 years, and then we're the Year 6 team, so we took it for the last year, the last 12 months. We found that the biggest challenge for us was having the kids that were in Year 5 had obviously moved into Year 6, so things that had been done and been implemented in Year 5, we didn't necessarily want to repeat in Grade 6. So that was an obvious struggle for us. So the Year 5s basically spent some time working on Minecraft and doing similar things to the things that people have already mentioned. So in Year 6, we decided to try and find some games, apps that would complement what we were already doing. So we basically spent some time working on and around the science curriculum. So we did things like earthquakes, which are obviously quite difficult to make hands-on. So the technology side really just complemented what we were already doing. So one of the things that we found difficult in Year 5 was trying to justify that to parents and give them a holistic viewpoint of where we were coming from and what we were trying to achieve. Whereas with the Year 6s coming at it from adding to the curriculum point of view, we found that quite easy to justify to parents, and most of the boys loved it. We got Michael out to the school, and he's had 2 days with us this year, and he's obviously had countless meetings with us, setting things up and surveying the boys and taking photos of them doing gameplay. But yeah, we felt really supported. So our context has changed quite considerably over the 3 years, but overall it's been a positive experience for us. Yeah, definitely from a primary point of view, we're obviously a Year 6 team, so the 4 of us are no more than 50 metres away from one another, door to door. Yeah, it works really well for me. So having the cluster of the teaching team there has really worked for us. We're constantly chatting about it, and obviously other things to do with teaching and not teaching. But yeah, location-wise, we were nice and close, so that obviously makes communicating very simple. And unlike yourself, we're kind of a teaching team where we're not across different subject areas, different year levels, so that obviously takes away that difficulty.
Thank you very much. And that's a really great take-home message for us as well, about the need to ensure that people do feel supported, and that hopefully research can contribute to that.
I wanted to ask the teachers if there was a ripple effect. So you can't just do it 1 year, get the kids excited, and then let it drift away. So I wondered if students started saying, what about them, can we do it too? Or if other teachers saw your success and said, can we play too?
We definitely have had that with this unit that we're working on this term. Kids sort of saw the planet stuff up on the wall when they walked in for term 4, and they're like, oh, is it our turn to do the unit now where we're, flying off to Aurora 56, which is our made-up planet. So there's this sense of kids waiting and wanting to do it. So when we ran that project 2 years ago, it was as part of the serious play project, but now it's something that we do because we've got a 5-6 composite. It's every 2 years. The kids would be pretty horrified if they'd waited 2 years for their turn and it never came. Just on something that you guys were saying before, and Bree, we're really lucky in that we team teach with our school and plan together. So everything that one prep class does, all the other prep classes do. So it means that you're very much a team. And if you run into problems with parents or you can justify what you're doing and you are a group. And I think another massive part of feeling supported with this sort of stuff is having an amazing principal. And we're really lucky that we've got Connie Watson, who is so amazing in terms of coming to her and letting us do some really cool sort of out there stuff in terms of gaming and education. So I think that that's another thing to consider, sort of principal involvement in a project like this.
It can't be the last word, but I did want to have the chance to say again how much we value the participation and support of the teachers and their schools and their systems, and in some cases their councils who come in on this project. Each of the Queensland schools entered individually and by name into this research project. In Victoria, the system was different and our partner was the Education Department down there, but again there was a process within the Education Department whereby those schools opted in. So first thing I wanted to say was how immensely grateful we are to you, the teacher school systems and whatever. Second thing is to say that I do think this work is pretty important, and I do think that, as was said, it's important that that people know about what we're doing, that we have material out there that teachers can call on, that administrators can call on, that decision makers can call on, to enable this field to move forward in productive kind of ways. Third thing I wanted to say was this has been the most fabulous research team to work with. It's been just the best research experience of my life working with this group of people. And I really wanted to thank Jason and Joe and Colleen and Michael and Sarah and Roberta and Leonie and Christy, who's not here, Geraldine for her help with additional things. The final thing I wanted to say is this event was organised by Roberta, and I reckon it's bloody fantastic. Thank you, Roberta.